Omar, I'd love to have you give everybody a little bit more detail on your background and how you got into this space, and then dive into talking about that culture of philanthropy.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me and having me here. It's great to talk with you. It is surreal to follow Lee Steinberg. If we could give him another round of applause, please. Um, Tremendously insightful. I'm a Philly kid, North Philly, born and raised. Despite the fact of who I work for, I still bleed green as an Eagles fan. Go Birds. And it's awkward. I just got to tell you, we'll talk about that later, but it can be awkward. I didn't understand philanthropy or impact investment as a career. I didn't understand family office work. But what I did understand when I was getting into this work was that largely sports ownership, was a family business. And at the core of family business are core family values. And so my first experience was working and advising the Lerner family with the Washington Nationals during my time there. My connection to the Lerner family and getting into this kind of sports ownership and advising in this space was because of a board that I had joined, which is why I joined the board of directors breakout session earlier. I was on the board of George Washington University, which is where all of the Lerner family had graduated from. So I got to know the family, and I did some work in nonprofit management and advising. And they said, "Well, why don't you help us figure out how we build the Washington Nationals Youth Baseball Academy?" And so that kind of entered me into kind of understanding how sports teams are making decisions around community engagement and philanthropy, and how they grow and scale youth baseball as part of the business, as part of the core business of the team. And then some years later, I had the opportunity coming back home to Philadelphia, was recruited to work with Josh Harris's family office, HRS Management, in order to help the family really understand the type of impact they could have in the world, the vehicles available to them and the tools, and the scale and scope of what they would want to accomplish. Being able to do that with their family philanthropy, Harris Philanthropies, being able to do that across the variety of different platforms they have through Devil's Youth Foundation, Sixers Youth Foundation, the Washington Commanders Foundation. And so there's an array of different types of ways that sports owners can be philanthropic and can engage in community. And so my role, my responsibility is to help engage and advise across all of that and really create a coherent and cohesive strategy, laser focused on youth, laser focused on stewardship as a core value, and really leveraging sports teams as a platform for advancing economic opportunity through partnerships with local small businesses. So that's how I got into it. Totally unexpected. My background was in politics and philanthropy, but really what this became was an opportunity to help a family who is incredibly busy understand the landscape they operate in, understand the needs of the communities that they do business in, and try to align the needs of the community and the capabilities of the sports team, the platform assets that are available to drive impact in community, create greater, deeper relationships with fans, but also create a civic spirit and identity that can advance many of the issues that Lee was talking about earlier. So that's how I got here.
So I think what's really fascinating is you've got multiple professional sports teams in multiple markets, not only multiple markets but rival markets.
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about the process that you have to go through with Josh and the family office and the ownership groups for each team to create that strategy that focuses on New Jersey, on Philly, on DC.
So prior to me joining, it's one of the reasons they asked me to join the family office. Before joining, I was executive director of an organization called Greenlight Fund, but in Philadelphia. And I helped advise the Greenlight Fund to launch. Started in Boston, then went to Philadelphia and the Bay Area. Now it's in 16 cities across the country. And so the idea is, how do you advance and measure impact across multiple markets? Each market has different needs. The capabilities of those markets are different. Some are government focused, and so what I mean by that is, if there's a major issue in the city, homelessness, economic mobility, some things are led by government. In other cities, some things are led by the private sector. the Chamber of Commerce, right? In my mind, a great example of a private sector led city is Charlotte. Charlotte tended to have a lot of leadership from its financial services sector. Meanwhile, if I another one would be Cincinnati, for example, incredibly strong private sector leadership. But in some other cities, it had to be the mayor, it had to be the city council, whose not just idea it was, but they had to move first in order to deploy capital. And so they brought me in to help understand as we continue to grow our footprint. What are the things we need to know about the communities that are unique to that place? But what are the overarching things we need to be managing against? And as I mentioned before, one of them, you start with kind of what's the core value or values that you're trying to establish across wherever you are. That's going to be common. But what's going to be unique is how you show up in the community and your needs based on your understanding of the community's needs. And that requires listening, it requires engagement and not to sell or to sell a ticket, but to listen to teachers, to police, to firefighters, to other stakeholders, so that the brand of the sports team can be can be a vehicle for social impact. And owners don't always think about that. For us, it's a top-down approach. And so, regardless if it's the NHL team, the Premier League team, we're Josh is a general manager of Crystal Palace Eagles, who won the FA Cup not too long ago. And so it's not just those major teams. We have to be aware and knowledgeable of the markets, and we also have to show and kind of model commitment by not just capital, but also showing up when it's not always easy to do.
So you talk about the different needs in the different markets and making that assessment. Is that done on the team level, you working with the team foundation or their community relations people at each team level, or do the teams all come together and combine forces to strategize?
So it starts at each team level because each market is different, and not just the market, not just the city, but the NHL and how it engages philanthropically is different from the NFL, and it's not just scope of resources. Sometimes it's legal. Sometimes there are things that the NBA teams can and can't do with players in partnership that the NFL is fine to do, and vice versa. And so everything starts at the team level. And as it begins to roll up to an enterprise level, which is Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment, we try to again stick to are they hitting the core values? Are they laser focused on youth? Youth for us is largely between 11 and 18, but for some of our programs, they go as low as 6 years old, particularly in basketball. So it always starts there. And then as we raise it up, we look at an enterprise wide view of the impact that Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment is having across all of the places we're in. And it can look different, but we are looking for some core things. And it's not just about deployment of capital; it's how many employees are engaged in the community, how many individuals, how many partnerships have we developed with local small businesses, how have we created excitement among core constituencies, particularly as we think about building stadium. We think about building an arena in South Philadelphia, a stadium at RFK in Washington, D.C., continue to take care of the Prudential Center in Newark. These are all things that we think about. So our philanthropy and our community engagement starts locally, but as we raise it up, we try to articulate an enterprise level view of the impact that the families and the owners are trying to have.
You raise an interesting point there as you're talking about the impact, right? And you're deploying the capital to create that impact. But what metrics are you able to develop or utilize to measure that impact and determine what the appropriate period of time is to make that measurement? Because you can deploy that capital
Sure.
right now, and those changes may not be seen for a generation, 5 years, 10 years, or beyond.
Especially if you focused on youth, right? You're taking the long view, but there are some ways that we look, kind of quarter to quarter. So, as I mentioned earlier, part of our focus is really around leveraging the platform of sports teams to accelerate wealth creation among local small businesses. So, we have a program called Enrich, and Enrich engages a local small business in the Philadelphia region. Could be connected to food and beverage, but might not. Most recently, we had a partnership where we selected a company called Dude Wipes. I don't know if you are familiar with Dude Wipes. I'm sure you are. From the moment 3 months after we started that partnership with them, they had a 66% increase in gross sales. And that was in the first 3 months. And then that number continued to tick up. So, partly what we wanted to understand is what is the relative impact of our platform on a company's business, because at the end of the day, that's not philanthropic primarily. It works for us. It works for a team to be partnered with a local small business that has a great service, great reputation in the community. That's helpful. But it's also helpful that if local small businesses look at their sports team and they see an ally and a partner who cares about helping them grow their business, if it's aligned with our platform. And so, in addition to enrich, while that's a one-to-one thing, and I can tell you increases in revenue, increases in impressions, and so on, we have something called Spirit of Small Business, which is a much broader opportunity where we bring multiple businesses onto our platform and share. And there we look at primarily increases in social media impressions, increases in mentions, not just digitally, but in print and elsewhere. And then we also look for a small segment of those businesses. We look at increases in sales after their participation in our in Spirit of Small Business. So those are just some particular ways around local small businesses. Big picture in our education work, we're looking at for our Wilt Chamberlain Memorial Fund, for example, which provides scholarships to college students. We're looking at persistence. We're looking at college completion. We're looking at wages after graduation, and we're looking at engagement and supporting other alumni who have received the scholarship. So in real time, we're trying to track the movement of people, not just moving scholarship dollars, but does this scholarship move them to complete a program? Are they moving through and actually getting a job after? So those are the types of things that we measure through the Sixers Youth Foundation. Devils Youth Foundation does some work as well, and the Washington Commanders Foundation. All three are incredibly effective at kind of gathering this data and communicating this impact in an annual way through our impact reports.
I think people would be really interested to hear the mechanics. You talk about these different teams and the different requirements in each city, the different needs that each city has, but you also are dealing with a diverse ownership group.
Yeah,
So while Josh might be the common link
yeah.
throughout there, talk a little bit about the challenges that exist when you're dealing in different markets and you've got different, some of the partners may be the same in some of the teams and not in others, and how you can really foster that culture of philanthropy and create a budget that makes sense within the context of that team, that league, that city.
I have to tell you, it's hard to make a budget that makes sense when you work with an ownership group. That's largely because the ownership group can be. This is not a bad thing. I don't want anyone to think it's a negative connotation. They can be transactional in their giving, and what I mean by that is Magic Johnson can come up to the ownership group, other members of the ownership group, and say, "Hey, I'm a big fan of this program at Delaware State University, and I would love if you could match my commitment." And they might do it, and my role is to help facilitate that commitment, right? And that's a one-off conversation that I'm involved in. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not budgeted though, right? But it's a useful relationship and a healthy indicator when owners are going to each other, asking each other to support very meaningful programs that Josh Harris might not have any visibility into, might not have connection to, but the culture amongst the ownership is that they support each other's philanthropic interests, and that's a really good culture to have. And the Washington Commanders ownership structure is larger than most, and so there's an opportunity to have more engagements like that. The Sixers are another with an ownership group that is very strong and very tight with each other, and they generally support each other and their philanthropic interests. David Edelman is an example of that, who's a big supporter of the Sixth Man Center in Philadelphia, and so all of the other members joined him in being kind of founding investors in the launch of the center, which is primarily focused on leveraging basketball as a platform for youth development in Philadelphia. And aside from David Edelman, none of the owners would have joined if David wasn't robust in his advocacy and putting his own money on the table and bringing others to ensure that it was a really good idea. So at the end of the day, having an ownership group that's as diverse as ours is across the multiple teams, and as you noted, each team has a different set of ownership groups. The positive indicator is that they partner with each other and share information about what they care about, what they want to support, and try to kind of have a giving circle amongst them. That's a really good sign for me as someone who's trying to advise the principal on philanthropy. Knowing that they're kind of forward facing on it and talking with their peers about it is a really good sign.
What are some of the challenges when you look over at Crystal Palace, for example, dealing with philanthropy outside of the United States? When we look at sports philanthropy around the world, obviously the US is probably the most developed market in that space. Um, England is pretty good, compared to most of the rest of Europe, but certainly some differences. We've had people from the Premier League when we were hosting Sports Philanthropy World virtually. We had several teams, and we had Palace for Life was part of that as well. So, talk about the differences that you see there.
Just to say a little bit about Crystal Palace and the Palace for Life Foundation, one thing I have found about the smaller Premier League teams is that they are incredibly place based. And what I mean by that is for Crystal Palace, when you talk about Crystal Palace, you're talking about South London, talk about Sellers Park. And so everything about it, the place-based nature and connection to the place means that you're able to use your own space to drive programming. And that's not always true depending on what city you're in. Some cities have very accessible sports spaces. Some are downtown, some are near downtown. In Philadelphia, it's not. And so you have to go to the tip of South Philadelphia in order to access the owned space by the sports team, right? In LA, SoFi is a little different, right? Where the Clippers play, and all of that is in and proximate to neighborhood. So what I say is, with Crystal Palace, it is connected to the fabric of South London, and so everything we do and the Palace for Life Foundation, everything it does is wrapped around that place and that neighborhood. That's not necessarily true in Philadelphia. That's not necessarily true in Washington D.C., where, as you may know, the arena's in another place. It's in another state. Not for long, but right now it's in another state. So I found that abroad, and when we talk abroad, there's a just deeper place-based connection and commitment by fans and by the team, that's harder to recreate if your own space is not proximate to and not accessible to large massive fans. That said, you're beginning to see a an influx of teams that are trying to build arenas more proximate to their downtowns, right? That is where I believe a number of teams are trying to fix and address what they see in England, particularly what they see in soccer, which is this deep place-based commitment that's almost a zip code of people who are absolutely excited about this sport. For the 76ers, people are coming from Delaware, they're coming from Jersey. They're coming from Bucks County, which is way up. And so it's a much broader region, and it's harder to use your own space. And by owned, I mean obviously your stadium, your arena to drive programming. So I find that actually in the US, it's harder to do that than it is abroad. So I just wanted to flip it. That said, the trend now is downtown arenas, drive people to come downtown and use your owned space to create greater programming. I think the Brooklyn Nets are probably the smartest at this right now.
Question, Nellie?
Yeah, I love this conversation. I am very curious, as someone who founded a nonprofit, grew it, depended on, donations, philanthropy, and, you know, people coming to help, whether it was using their name or whatever. And one thing I found really interesting with sports and with athletes is that oftentimes really great intentions. They start a program and they build it and then they get traded
Mm,
and then it's gone. And I think a lot about this. I would like to talk to you maybe on the side because I have ideas on what they could do better. Because at the end of the day, you know, you don't want it to be a fleeting, idea that works for a minute. And while they're popular, and then when they're no longer playing, it's gone and then it's reverted. And then a lot of them I notice get in trouble. They start a foundation and they hire all their friends and family to run it. And all of a sudden they violate all kinds of compliance, requirements. And it's a full time job running a nonprofit and it takes a special skill set. And I always say, hey, I'm not a basketball player. Why do they want to do nonprofit work? Why can't we work together and accomplish the same goal for that's mutually beneficial where they get their legacy, they get their impact, and it becomes sustainable for all, and especially the people that we're trying to make a difference for.
Yeah.
And we have a session with Andrew Morton, who's our attorney as well, who'll be leading that at the next breakout slot on the legal and practical considerations for athletes with their foundations, because that's one of the big risks, right, that athletes have is that legal risk, that reputational risk, and financial risk of doing a foundation but not doing it the right way. But I think the core of Nellie's question is more, when you start building a program
Yeah.
that's tied very strongly to one individual, what happens when they get chipped from the Sixers to the Clippers?
We've seen this on the NFL side. A number of our former Eagles players who got traded came back to continue to run program in Philadelphia, and the reason it was easy for them is because I heard it earlier. It was fiscally sponsored by the Philadelphia Foundation or by an organization that was so the program, the back office was covered, and all that was needed to be done was to have a program staffer on the ground to coordinate with the player, even if the player had gone to Green Bay or the player had gone to Miami. So I've seen very successful models where players have thought about, all right, I might not be here forever. What can I do to make sure this program continues on in this place, regardless of where they end up? But often I find that athletes who have who take a city seriously, who fall in love with a city, they'll always be in love with that city, even after they get traded. And so, the what I would recommend is to identify fiscal sponsors like a community foundation, like a United Way, like another, and encourage player programs and player foundations to consider parking their programs there to sustain the local in market momentum. Otherwise, they could leave and take it somewhere else, but they'll have to build it from scratch again, and it won't be as effective. Yeah.
And I think that's a great point because the fiscal sponsor model is one that a lot of people don't know and understand at the outset. And everybody, we talk to athletes, and the first question they ask is like, "How can I set up my own foundation?" And Lee's done that with a lot of people as well in terms of helping them get set up and understand that they may not need their own foundation. They're better off partnering with existing organizations that already have the infrastructure and staff, and they can support it. They can put their name in lights for the celebrity golf outing or for other types of events. They don't need to be the foundation itself. Scott?
We go. Um, what is a consideration for an ownership group as it relates to building a mixed use type of a new stadium project versus trying to do what's good for the downtown area or something like that? Because they're like the Battery in Atlanta is killing it around Truist Park, and so it's a whole new revenue stream right there. So, what are the considerations that you go through in terms of trying to do what's good for the community, but also trying what's doing to do what's good for the ownership group?
I mean, at its core, stadium arena developments are go through largely political processes. And so there are commitments that have to be made through community benefits agreements and the like. And so a lot of that ends up looking like is what are ways beyond the sport that the project can help the city generate revenue, particularly in areas where the reason you're building there is because there's a lack of activity to generate revenue. And so what that takes you is thinking about sports to thinking about sports and entertainment. And so the trend going forward, regardless of what this will be, is really creating sports and entertainment districts rather than simply a standalone place to go and watch a sport. And I don't just mean sports and food and beverage. I mean places that aggregate activity outside of recreation. And so we're moving away from the standalone to the much more comprehensive approach. One, it's the economics are better for the sports team in many ways. The economics are much better for the city in terms of generation of revenues, sales taxes and property taxes and otherwise in the region. So um, my short answer is we're moving away from the standalone, much more towards the districts that generate revenues in multiple ways. I think it's opportunity for individuals who are sports adjacent, particularly entrepreneurs in sports, to look for, they're going to be looking for maker spaces and other ways that are sports adjacent to generate revenue and excitement, not just for that sport, but for other things. So I think this is just a tremendous opportunity in sports because it's not just about sports, it's about sports entertainment and how do you best use the space available as a platform to accelerate X, Y, or Z. And that X, Y, or Z varies but from city to city.
Right here, second row.
How you doing? My name is Brian Anderson. I work with DC Scores in DC. So thanks Magic Johnson for supporting us.
That's right.
Also here on behalf of Living Sports. So thank you, Alicia. One of my questions is that I feel well. One, I want to say I feel really seen by the work that you're doing. I want to work in VC. But then also in terms of how it's such a big look to the owners, of course, and the teams and the support to build this next generation up. But the players themselves are becoming million-dollar businesses themselves.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of comparison between the work that you do with the owners and the teams. Now that could be trickled down to the players and helping them run their foundations and the work that they do. So what is those trends that you see working with the teams that can now translate to people who are now working with these billion-dollar players who are now their own businesses that, looking at it from a chessboard, like all the
Mhm.
different pieces that have to move and result to now make these things happen.
I have all the thoughts in the world. Before I go there, I just have to note that the NIL process changes a lot of it doesn't change, it accelerates a lot of this. And codifies it in a way where we now many people believe we have to bring a wealth management approach to 17-year-olds in order to help them understand the vast complexity of what they're stepping into. So you can imagine a number of wealth management firms are ahead of you. They're already there, and they're going, they're going upstream, to adapt their capabilities when they typically work with a 40 or 50-year-old family, of individuals or families. Now, how do they partner and build trust with these teenagers are having major multi-million dollar liquidity events. It's scary. And so you have to think about what are the structures that will least manipulate or try to manipulate these young people and their families. And whatever that structure is has to be based on deep, deep trust, and it has to be based on an understanding of the growing sophistication of the financial picture that they're stepping into. Um, right now, wealth management firms are in that space. There are others that are in that space in and around NIL, but the ones that I think will be most successful are going to be the ones that look to the athlete and provide a much more holistic approach. um, Agents are playing that role and agencies are playing that role, and they have for a long time to kind of coordinate the different the different pieces that need to provide services and advice and guidance to a player to manage their estate, to manage their career. But there's a gap here. There's certainly a gap, and but what I want to highlight is that the wealth management approach, which is this isn't just about your monthly budget. This is about how you're thinking about retirement, how you're thinking about the estate that you're building with you and your family. It has to have that approach if that's the pathway you're thinking. Otherwise, you'll under optimize for the impact you can have on a young athlete who's ready to make their mark.
Hopefully you can hear me. Omar, thank you so much for this conversation. It's fantastic. So I'm from Temple University. So first and most importantly, go Birds.
Go Birds. Yeah.
And
And go Owls.
secondarily, you work in a very complex portfolio of groups representing many leagues. Um, as you obviously know, all of the leagues have dozens and dozens of initiatives that then they ask their franchises to activate locally. And then each individual franchise does their own thing to respond to their own community needs over and above what the league mandates. So I guess I have two questions. One is, how are you able, or are you effectively able, to integrate where necessarily and individualize where necessary? And then in your role, while franchises obviously compete on the field or on the ice, to what degree are you best practice sharing and collaborating with all of the other foundations that every other professional team has? Because you're not really competing with them, you're all activating in your own local markets. Thanks.
Yep. To take the latter question first, we start with best practices at the enterprise level, and we meet. Part of my job is to create that coherence, and to make sure that, one, we're addressing best practices, but also there are things that are unique to market and unique to the league that they're in, around capabilities. So I spend a lot of my time with the heads of those foundations, with the heads of community relations in each of those teams. You're right. There are some core tentpole programming that the NFL expects, that the NBA expects, that the NHL expects. A lot of that is focused on getting hockey, basketball, and football to young people, whether flag football, whether it's junior 76ers. The one thing, just to take a moment about the junior 76ers program, it's not just getting young kids to play basketball. It was something I heard earlier, the introduction to broadcasting, the introduction to to physical health, and there the other parts of the game that are off the court, off the pitch, off the field. Those are the types of things that I think local markets go much more deeply into, based on the needs of that market. But the NBA has a very high level around junior fill in the blank. On the Commander side, on the NFL side, flag football, youth flag football is going to be critical. Has to be. The expansion of flag football, I think, creates greater safety for young people, of course, and disincentivizes that Pop Warner approach. So I'm excited about a lot of that. So to that last point you made around how much time do I spend on it, how much do we do it? A lot of my time, and we do it a lot. And you're correct that in each market we can go a layer deeper and innovate on those tentpole programs. We also develop our own tentpole programs, based on what the primary focus is for us. Wealth creation through local and small business investment is very, very important for us, in addition to our focus on youth. Remind me of your first question so I can go back to it.
The sharing across franchises who typically compete. So what you do for the Devils,
Yeah.
are there 31 other foundation directors of NHL teams who get together and talk about this in terms of activating, whether it's Hockey Fights Cancer or their local stuff?
Rob Woolley at NHL Foundation, the NBA Foundation, and the NFL all have their kind of top head of, right? And that person convenes, and they do regular collaboration and information sharing and best practice sharing. A lot of it was around diversity, equity, and inclusion over the last year or so, but increasingly, it's really around building the skills and capabilities of the executive directors and their teams at the team level to support what they're doing. But the answer is yes. In each of those areas, they convene on a monthly basis, which is, honestly, we don't do it enough. We need to do more of it, and I think there's more we can do across leagues. You know how the NBA can learn from the NHL, can learn from the NFL. Josh has been kind of uniquely focused on that as someone who brought brought a championship winning basketball executive into a football team to advise. He's been focused on how to take the best practice learning from one league and apply it to other leagues. And that's new, it's experimental, but we're trying it. On the philanthropy side, we're getting some impact from it.
Thank you, Omar.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.